The boy and the stranger. It was a warm Sunday afternoon in San Francisco. The sun hung lazily in the sky, sprinkling gold over the streets, and families strolled through the park. Sundar Pichai, dressed simply in a soft blue shirt and faded jeans, walked hand in hand with his son, Arjun, who had just turned 12. They had promised each other this time, just the two of them. No meetings, no phone calls, no emails. Only laughter, ice cream, and quiet conversations. Arjun loved these rare moments. His father, though admired by millions, was just dad here. Someone who let him climb trees, told him silly jokes, and listened to him with all his heart. They sat on a wooden bench by the playground, and Arjun tore into his chocolate cone, leaving sticky smears on his hands. And it happened. A man in a dark jacket, standing by the swings, began staring at them. At first, Sundar didn't notice, but Arjun did. He tugged at his dad's sleeve and whispered, "That man keeps looking at us." Sundar smiled softly and reassured him, "Don't worry, Arjun. Maybe he's waiting for someone." But the man kept staring, his eyes sharp, his jaw tight. And then, as Sundar reached into his pocket to check his phone, the man stepped closer, his footsteps heavy on the gravel. "You?" the man said, his voice cracking the quiet. "You think you're better than everyone, don't you?" Sundar looked up, startled, unsure if the words were meant for him. But the man's glare was fixed not on Sundar, but on Arjun, you spoiled little brat. The stranger snarled, his voice rising. "Do you even know who your father is? Do you know how many lives he's ruined? Walking around here like you own the world?" Arjun froze. The cone fell from his hand, and the chocolate splattered on the ground. Sundar stood quickly, shielding his son with his body. "Please," he said calmly. "You're upset. Let's talk about this." But not like this, not in front of him. But the man's anger only grew. His voice carried across the playground now, drawing the attention of families and joggers and even a couple sitting by the fountain. "You're teaching him to be just like you, to crush people under your feet, to smile while you destroy." Sundar's heart thudded in his chest. He glanced at his son, who stood there, small and shaken, his eyes filling with confusion and fear. This was not how Sundar wanted his boy to see the world. Not filled with hate and bitterness. "I don't know who." "You are," Sundar said, keeping his voice level. "But if I have wronged you somehow, I am sorry. I never meant to hurt anyone." The man laughed bitterly, a sound that sent chills down Arjun's spine. "Sorry?" he sneered. "You think sorry fixes everything?" By now, people had stopped to watch. Whispers floated through the air. Some began filming on their phones. The tension crackled like static. Sundar could feel his son's tiny fingers gripping his hand. Trembling. Just then, a tall figure appeared at the edge of the crowd. Unnoticed at first, he walked with steady purpose, his expression unreadable. And though the man kept yelling, everyone began to sense something had changed. The tall figure stepped forward, and a murmur ran through the crowd. Elo and Musk. He didn't say a word at first. He simply looked at the stranger, then at Sundar, and then at Arjun. And the entire park seemed to hold its breath. Elon's eyes narrowed, and he spoke, finally breaking the silence. But what he said next left everyone completely frozen. Asterisk the quiet. Before the storm, the park was so quiet in that moment you could almost hear the leaves trembling in the soft breeze. Children stopped playing, their feet dangling mid-swing, their laughter swallowed by the strange heaviness in the air. Sundar stood protectively in front of Arjun, his hand still shielding his boy, his mind racing for the right words, the right gesture, anything to keep the situation from spiraling. But something told him words alone wouldn't be enough this time. The stranger had gone still as soon as Elon Musk arrived. The fire in his eyes faltered just slightly, like a candle hit by wind, yet his fists remained clenched. He turned toward Elon now, confusion flickering across his face as if asking, "So what are you doing here?" Elon didn't answer the unspoken question. He stepped closer, and with each step the crowd seemed to lean in, drawn to the strange gravity between the three men. When Elon finally stopped, he was standing just a few feet from Sundar and his son. He glanced briefly at Sundar, who met his gaze with a mix of gratitude and concern. But then Elon turned to Arjun, crouching slightly, so his eyes were level with the boys. His voice was calm and low when he finally spoke. "Hey," he said softly, his words cutting through the tension without raising the volume. "You okay?" Arjun's lower lip quivered as he tried to form words, but nothing came out. He just nodded faintly, though his wide eyes betrayed the fear still inside him. Then Elon slowly rose to his full height and fixed his gaze on the stranger. This time his voice grew sharper, edged with something steely, but still measured. "I don't know who you are," he began, "but yelling at a child in public, that's not strength. That's cruelty." "And cruelty," he said, pausing to let the weight of his words settle, "is a choice." The stranger let out a bitter laugh, though it sounded forced, now brittle. "Oh, that's rich coming from you," he spat. "Both of you. Giants of your little empires. Walking around like gods while the rest of us scrape by. You think you're heroes because you smile and say nice words. But I've seen what your companies do. I've seen what happens to people like me." Sundar felt a pang of guilt cut through him. He wanted to speak, but he sensed this wasn't his moment. His hands tightened gently on Arjun's shoulders as he watched Elon stand still, letting the man's anger pour out. "You destroy families," the stranger continued, his voice breaking now, his anger blurring into grief. "You automate our jobs, you build your robots and your software, and we disappear. And your kids," his eyes flicked to Arjun, and his voice hardened again. "They'll never know what it feels like to go hungry. They'll never know what it means to be powerless." For the first time, the stranger's eyes glistened as though tears were waiting just behind them. He quickly turned away from the boy, trying to gather himself, but the crowd had already seen Dot, and then Elon took another step forward. But what he did next shocked everyone. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, worn notebook. He held it up for a moment, as though even the notebook itself carried a story too heavy to speak. He opened it, tore out a single page, and slowly scribbled something down. The stranger stared at him, bewildered, unable to look away as Elon folded the page neatly and held it out. "Here," Elon said quietly. "This isn't charity. This isn't pity. But it's a start. Take it." The stranger hesitated. His hand hovered over the folded paper as though it might burn him. Finally, with a shuddering breath, he took it, his fingers brushing against Elon's. But before he could open the page, Elon spoke again, his tone softer now, but filled with something heavier than before. "You're right about one thing. We don't always understand what it costs. But yelling at a kid won't change your story, and neither will staying angry." The stranger swallowed hard, his shoulders slumping. The fight drained from his body all at once, replaced by something else, shame, maybe, or relief. Then Elon turned back to Sundar and Arjun. His eyes softened when he looked at the boy again. "You're brave," he said to Arjun, a faint smile touching his lips. "Braver than most grown-ups here." The crowd stirred, murmuring among themselves, phones still recording. But nobody dared interrupt. And then, just as the stranger unfolded the note to see what was written, his eyes went wide. He froze, staring down at the words and everyone. Around him fell silent. What does this mean?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. But Elon simply gave a small, knowing nod and began to walk away. And in that silence, as the stranger's hands trembled around the note, Sundar felt his own heart skip, because on that crumpled piece of paper was something no one had expected. And whatever it was, it would change everything. Asterisk, what the note said, the park felt different now. The golden sunlight that just an hour ago seemed warm and inviting now felt heavy, almost oppressive. The air was thick with silence, as though every tree, every bird, every onlooker was holding its breath. Sundar's arm was still draped protectively over Arjun's shoulder, but his thoughts were elsewhere. on that single piece of paper clutched in the stranger's hands. The stranger stood rigid, staring at the note, his lips moving but making no sound. His fingers tightened around the edges of the paper, as if afraid the words might slip away if he let go. The crowd, sensing something important had just happened, edged closer, yet nobody dared to speak first. Even the children stayed quiet, their wide eyes darting between Sundar, Elon's retreating figure, and the man with the note asterisk finally. The stranger swallowed hard and let out a shaky breath. His voice, when it came, was low but cracked with disbelief. He offered me. The words trailed off, and he looked up at Sundar, his eyes wet now, the fury long gone. Sundar spoke gently, his voice steady, though he himself was feeling a storm of questions. What did he offer you? The stranger blinked at the paper again before answering, his voice louder this time, though still fragile. He offered me a chance. Someone in the crowd let out a surprised gasp. Another whispered, What does that mean? The man turned the paper so Sundar could see, and there, scrawled in Elon's unmistakable handwriting, was a short note, asterisk. Come to this address tomorrow at 9 a.m. You will find a door. Knock. Tell them you're the man from the park. They will know. And if you really want to change your life, walk through it. Below the words was an address. Nothing else. No signature. No explanation. Just that strange invitation. The stranger's hands trembled as he read it again, almost not believing it was real. Why would he do this? He asked, his voice breaking. Sundar didn't know what to say. There were no easy answers. He could only meet the man's gaze and offer him the truth as he knew it. Sometimes, Sundar said softly, when you've been given more than you need, you want to give someone else a way out too. Maybe that's all this is. But inside, even Sundar felt unsettled. What kind of door was waiting at that address? And what would happen when the stranger walked through it? As the stranger stood there, clinging to the paper as though it were the most precious thing he'd ever owned, the crowd slowly began to disperse. Some people nodded at Sundar in quiet respect. Others stole one last look at Arjun, who was still pressed close to his father, his small face pale but calm now. The stranger took a step towards Sundar, his expression softer now, almost apologetic. I shouldn't have shouted at your son, he admitted, his voice low. He didn't deserve that. He paused, searching for words. I didn't know where else to put all this anger. I've been carrying it for so long. It felt like the only thing I had left. Sundar nodded slowly, his own chest tight. You're not alone in feeling that way, he said quietly, but you don't have to carry it alone either. The man looked at Sundar for a long moment, then crouched down to meet Arjun's eyes. Kid, he said hoarsely, I'm sorry. You were just eating your ice cream. I should have let you be. Arjun studied him for a second, then gave a small, brave nod. It's okay, he said softly. Something broke inside the stranger then, a sound between a laugh and a sob. He straightened up, wiped at his eyes, and glanced once more at the note. I guess, he murmured. I'll find out tomorrow what this really means. But before he could say more, a loud buzzing sound erupted nearby. Sundar instinctively turned toward it. Several people gasped and pointed toward the sky. Above the park, a sleek black drone was descending rapidly, its lights blinking. It hovered just above the ground, then landed smoothly near the fountain. People moved back, whispering nervously. Unsure if it was part of some kind of security measure, the drone's compartment opened with a faint hiss, and inside was a small envelope, sealed with wax. Everyone stared as Sundar carefully reached in and picked it up. His fingers ran over the seal, and he felt a chill run through him. He broke the wax and unfolded the paper. His eyes moved over the words once, twice, then a third time, and then he froze, because written inside, in the same sharp handwriting, was another message, this one addressed directly to him. You two have a choice to make. Come to the same door. Bring the boy if you dare. Tomorrow at 9 a.m. No excuses. Below, it was nothing but a strange symbol, a circle split by a single line down the middle. Sundar looked up, his heart pounding, and saw the stranger staring back at him, equally confused dot around them. The crowd buzzed with nervous energy. People were filming, whispering, speculating, but Sundar only felt the weight of the words pressing down on him. He folded the note slowly, his hands tighter than he realized. He looked down at Arjun, who gazed back at him with wide, searching eyes. "Dad," Arjun said softly, "what's behind that door?" Sundar crouched to his son's level, his own voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know yet," he admitted. "But we're going to find out." And as he spoke, he couldn't help but notice that Elon, who had disappeared into the crowd just moments ago, was now standing at the edge of the park again, watching silently, his expression unreadable. And then, without a word, Elon turned and walked away once more, leaving behind only the mystery of the door and the questions. No one dared to ask aloud. Asterisk, the door night fell over San Francisco like a heavy curtain, and the quiet hum of the city seemed louder somehow. Sundar lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the events of the day over and over. Every word the stranger had shouted, every glance from the crowd. The way Elon had simply appeared like some silent judge and left just as suddenly. But most of all, the note. He turned his head and looked at the folded piece of paper resting on the nightstand. The words glowed faintly in his mind, even in the dark. "You too have a choice to make. Bring the boy if you dare. Tomorrow at 9 a.m. No excuses." Sundar's chest tightened. It was just a note, just words on paper, and yet it carried a weight he couldn't explain. He thought of his son sleeping peacefully in the next room, of his small hands clutching Sundar's arm earlier, of the question he'd asked just before bed. What's behind the door? Sundar had no answer for him. But now, staring into the shadows, he thought maybe the only way to protect his son was to walk through that door and find out for himself. When dawn broke, the sky was painted in muted pinks and grays, the kind of morning that seemed neither alive nor asleep. Sundar, dressed quietly, choosing the plainest clothes he owned, jeans, an old sweater. He packed a bottle of water in his bag. Though he didn't know why. Then he stood outside Arjun's door for a long time. His hand resting on the knob. Finally, he opened it. Arjun was already awake, sitting on the edge of his bed, his sneakers on, his little backpack slung over his shoulder. He looked up at his father and simply said, "I'm ready." Sundar's heart swelled with equal parts pride and fear. "You don't have to come," he murmured. But Arjun shook his head. "You told me yesterday. We find out together." So they walked down the quiet streets as the city woke around them. The address led them far from the polished avenues of downtown into a part of the city Sundar hadn't visited in years. The buildings here were old, weathered, their walls covered in fading graffiti and ivy. Shopkeepers swept their steps in silence, barely glancing up. The deeper they went, the narrower the streets became, until they found themselves standing in front of a tall black iron gate, behind which rose an unmarked brick building with no windows. The address matched. This was it. Sundar hesitated. His fingers curled around the iron bars as he looked at the heavy oak door in the center of the building, flanked by two small lanterns that flickered weakly despite the morning light. Beside him, Arjun whispered, "Is this the door?" Sundar nodded slowly. "Yes, this is it." The gate was unlocked. It creaked as he pushed it open, and together they stepped into the small courtyard. The stranger from the park was already there, standing a few feet from the door, clutching his own note like a lifeline. His eyes met Sundar's briefly, and though no words passed between them, a silent understanding did. There were others too, maybe 10 or 12 people, all standing at varying distances from the door, all holding similar notes, all wearing the same tense expression. They came from different walks of life. A woman in a nurse's uniform, an old man with calloused hands, a teenager who couldn't have been more than 17. None of them spoke. They simply waited. And then, at exactly 9 o'clock, the lanterns flared to life, casting long, eerie shadows across the courtyard. The oak door groaned as it slowly opened inward, revealing nothing but darkness beyond. A figure appeared. In the doorway, though it was hard to see their face clearly. They were dressed in gray, their posture perfectly still. In a quiet, measured voice, they said, "Those who are ready may enter. Leave everything you do not wish to carry behind." One by one, the people began to step forward. The stranger looked back at Sundar once before moving through the doorway and disappearing into the dark. Sundar took a deep breath and looked down at Arjun. "You sure about this?" he asked, though his own resolve was already set. Arjun nodded, his small hand finding Sundar's. "We go together," he said firmly. And so they stepped forward. Inside. The air was cool and smelled faintly of earth and metal. The darkness swallowed them at first, but then faint lights flickered overhead, illuminating a narrow corridor lined with doors on either side. Each door bore a different symbol, a circle, a triangle, a spiral, a broken line. But none bore any words. The gray figure reappeared at the end of the corridor and spoke again, their voice echoing strangely. "Behind each door is a truth," they said. "Once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Choose carefully. Not every truth is kind." The group shuffled uneasily, exchanging glances. The stranger from the park moved to the door with the spiral, and after a long pause, opened it. There was a flash of white light, and then he was gone, one by one. Others chose their doors and disappeared the same way. Finally, Sundar and Arjun stood alone. Sundar looked at the door with the broken line and felt an odd pull, though he didn't understand why. But then Arjun tugged his sleeve. "This one," he whispered, pointing to the door with the circle. "We should go here." Sundar hesitated. "Why that one?" Arjun shrugged faintly. "Because it feels like it's waiting for us." And so, trusting his son, Sundar placed his hand on the cold handle of the circle door. It thrummed faintly under his fingers, like it was alive somehow. Looked down at Arjun one last time. "Ready?" Arjun nodded. "Ready." And then Sundar pushed the door open. At first, there was nothing but blinding light, warm, almost too warm, and then the sound of something vast and strange, like wind roaring through a canyon. Sundar squinted, trying to make out shapes, and slowly, they emerged. They stood at the edge of what looked like a massive glass bridge stretching into the horizon. Below them, an ocean of stars churned and shimmered, and the air seemed to hum with energy. On the bridge ahead, dozens, maybe hundreds of figures walked silently, each one carrying a glowing object in their hands. And at the far end of the bridge was a great arched doorway radiating golden light. Unlike anything Sundar had ever seen, he felt Arjun squeeze his hand tighter, his small voice breaking the silence. "Dad? What is this place?" But before Sundar could answer, a familiar voice echoed from the bridge ahead. "Welcome," it said, calm and unhurried. And out of the light stepped Elon Musk, his eyes reflecting the same stars that swirled beneath the glass bridge. He smiled faintly at Sundar and Arjun, his hands clasped behind his back. "You made it?" He said simply. And then, without waiting, he turned and began walking toward the golden doorway. Sundar stared after him, his mind racing with questions, his heart hammering in his chest. And then he heard Elon's voice again, calling back to him across the bridge. "But are you ready to see what comes next?" The bridge of choicest glass bridge stretched before them like a dream, or perhaps a warning. Every step Sundar took echoed faintly, the sound swallowed quickly by the strange, weightless air. Below, the stars churned like an ocean of quiet storms, flickering and shifting, impossible to look at for long. Ahead of them, the golden doorway shimmered like the sun trapped in metal. Waiting. Elon walked several paces ahead, calm, unhurried. His silhouette cut sharply against the glowing arch at the far end. It was hard to tell if he was leading them or testing them. Sundar tightened his grip on Arjun's hand as they followed, his mind a torrent of questions. Every few feet they passed others on the bridge, each carrying something glowing in their hands. A woman clutched what looked like a spinning orb of light, tears streaming silently down her face. A man held a sharp shard of glass that pulsed faintly, his jaw set in grim determination. None of them spoke. Arjun finally broke the silence, his voice small and shaky but curious. Why does everyone have something in their hands? Elon didn't turn around when he answered. Because everyone brings their truth with them. Some carry it proudly. Some try to hide it. But no one crosses the bridge empty-handed. Sundar glanced at his own hands. Empty. He felt a knot of unease tighten in his chest. Arjun noticed too and glanced up at him nervously. Dad, he whispered, what are we supposed to carry? But before Sundar could answer, the bridge beneath him flickered suddenly, as though a great wind had rushed through the stars. Below, rattling the very foundation. The group stopped, and Elon finally turned, his expression grave now. You're close enough, he said. You should choose now. Sundar swallowed hard. Choose what? Elon's eyes softened slightly. You've both been brought here because you stood when others turned away, because you saw more than just yourselves, because you dared to ask what was behind the door. He stepped closer, his gaze moving from Sundar to Arjun and back again. But that bravery comes at a price. The golden door is not a gift. It is a choice. And you can't walk through it unless you know what you carry with you and what you're willing to leave behind. The words sank deep into Sundar's chest like stones dropped into water. He looked at Arjun, who stared wide-eyed at Elon, his small fist clenched. Elon gestured toward the edge of the bridge, where two tall pedestals rose silently out of the glass floor. Faint lights swirled above each one, waiting. Step forward, Elon said quietly, and let the bridge show you. Arjun moved first. He let go of Sundar's hand and approached one of the pedestals, his sneakers making soft thuds on the glass. When he placed his palms on the swirling light, it flared brilliantly, so bright Sundar had to shield his eyes. When it faded, Arjun was holding something, a small glowing paper crane, delicate and alive somehow, its wings fluttering faintly in his palms. Arjun looked at Sundar, his voice full of awe and confusion. What is it? Elon spoke for him. That, he said, is your kindness, the way you forgive even when it hurts, the way you see the good in everyone, even a stranger yelling at you in a park. Arjun stared down at the crane as if afraid to break it. Then Elon turned his gaze to Sundar. And now you, he said softly. Sundar approached the second pedestal. His heart pounded in his ears. When he placed his hands in the light, it felt warm at first, but then it grew hotter, searing almost until he gritted his teeth and bore it. The light flared just as before, and when it dimmed, Sundar was holding something heavy and dark, a jagged stone, faintly glowing from cracks that ran through it. He stared at it, confused. What is this? Elon studied him for a long moment. That, he said finally, is your doubt. Every time you question yourself, every sleepless night, every decision you second guess, it's the weight you carry, but also the thing that keeps you humble. Sundar swallowed hard and looked down at the stone. He felt its weight pressing into his palms, but strangely, he didn't want to drop it. Elon stepped back, his voice louder now, carrying across the bridge. You both have your truths. The door ahead does not care if you are perfect, only that you are honest. But remember this, if you walk through that door, you cannot come back the same. What waits on the other side will change you. And not all who cross find what they think they're looking for. The stars below roared faintly, as though echoing his words. Arjun looked up at Sundar, his eyes shining in the strange light. What do we do now? Sundar closed his fingers around the jagged stone, feeling its heat. He met Elon's gaze and then looked down at his son. We go forward, he said. We see what's there. Elon gave the faintest nod, his expression unreadable. Together, Sundar and Arjun began walking again, the crane and the stone glowing in their hands. The golden door grew larger and brighter with each step until it filled their vision entirely. The other figures on the bridge parted silently to let them through, some nodding faintly as they passed, others avoiding their gaze. Just a few feet from the door, Sundar felt a strange tug in his chest, like something inside him was resisting, afraid to let go. The stone in his hands grew heavier, and the air around them thickened, harder to breathe. Arjun stopped suddenly. He looked up at his father, his little face full of quiet determination. "Dad," he said softly, "you don't have to carry it anymore. If you don't want to." Sundar froze. ELO and single quotes. S voice came again from behind them. Quiet now, but unmistakable. He's right. No one can walk through if they don't first decide what they're willing to leave at the threshold. Sundar looked at the jagged stone, then at the boy, then at the golden door waiting before them. He thought of every mistake he'd ever made, every sleepless night, every doubt, every quiet moment of guilt. And then, slowly, he set the stone down on the glass floor, to his surprise. It stayed there, glowing faintly, and the weight in his chest lifted just enough to let him breathe again. Arjun squeezed his hand. The paper crane fluttered once, as though proving. And then, together, they reached the door. The golden light grew so bright it was hard to see. Sundar could feel his heart hammering in his chest, his palms slick with sweat. Elon's voice came one last time, quiet but clear. "You're ready," he said. "Step through." Sundar looked down at Arjun. And then, taking a deep breath, they stepped into the light. What waited for them on the other side made Sundar stop in his tracks. He couldn't believe what he was seeing, because waiting there, in the quiet beyond the golden light, was someone he never thought he'd see again. Someone who shouldn't even be alive. Asterisk, the last choice of light was blinding at first. Sundar felt it on his skin, warm and almost heavy, as though the air itself had a weight here. He held tightly to Arjun's hand, afraid that if he let go even for a second, he'd lose him in this strange, glowing world. As his eyes adjusted, the golden brilliance faded into something softer, more human, a quiet field under a pale sky, dotted with trees that shimmered faintly, as though they were made of light and memory. And standing just a few feet away, waiting for him at the center of the field, was a figure he knew at once. Sundar froze, his breath caught in his throat, his legs refusing to move. Because standing there, impossibly real and alive, was his father. The man looked exactly as Sundar remembered him, tall but tired, with kind eyes and hands rough from years of work. He wore the same simple shirt he'd worn the last time Sundar had seen him all those years ago, before the illness took him away. Asterisk, Sundar's chest tightened painfully, and his voice cracked when he finally managed to speak. "Pa?" His father smiled faintly, the corners of his eyes crinkling just so. "Yes, Kanna," he said softly, using the old word he hadn't heard in decades. Arjun looked up at his father, confused but quiet. "Dad," he whispered. "Who is he?" Sundar swallowed hard, his heart breaking and mending all at once. "He's my dad," he murmured. And then, slowly, he let go of Arjun's hand and took a step forward. His father's expression stayed calm, though his eyes glistened faintly. "You've come far," he said, his voice deep and warm. "Farther than I ever dreamed. But here you are." Sundar could feel the tears welling up, unbidden. I thought you were gone," he managed to say. His father nodded gently. "Gone? No, just waiting here for you to find your way." Sundar reached out, his fingers trembling, and for a moment he expected the figure to vanish like a ghost, but his father's hand met his solidly, warm and real. Elon's voice echoed faintly behind him, though he didn't turn to look. "What you find beyond the door," Elon said, "is what you've been carrying all along. Truth, regret, forgiveness. You decide what stays. You decide what you take back." Sundar looked at his father, overwhelmed. "Why? Why now?" "Why? Here?" His father placed a hand on his shoulder and looked at him with quiet certainty. "Because it's time," he said simply. "Time to put it all down." Sundar felt the stone again, though he'd left it on the bridge. That weight of doubt and guilt, of every mistake, every word left unsaid. He felt it pressing on him even here. His father seemed to sense it too. He nodded toward the field behind him, where a shallow pool of light shimmered like water, If you want to go back, his father said softly, you have to let go. All of it, even me. The words cut through Sundar like glass. He looked down at Arjun, who now stood close to him again, still holding the little paper crane in his hands. But Sundar began, his voice breaking. If I let go, will I lose you again? His father smiled sadly, as though he'd already heard this question 1,000 times. You don't lose me by letting go, he said. You lose me by holding on to what keeps you from living. Arjun reached up then, his small fingers slipping into Sundar's hand. His voice was quiet but steady. Dad, it's okay. We can go back. Together, Sundar closed his eyes. He felt the warmth of his father's hand, the coolness of Arjun's, and the impossible light all around him. And then, finally, he nodded. He stepped toward the pool of light and, with both hands, released the weight he'd carried for so long. It left him like smoke dissolving in the air. When he opened his eyes again, his father was still there, but fading, gently, like mist in the morning sun. I'm proud of you, his father whispered, his voice already far away. Always. And then he was gone. The field dissolved into white light, and Sundar felt himself pulled forward, weightless. He held Arjun close, his heart pounding, and together they stepped back through the door. They awoke on the park bench where it had all begun. The afternoon sun was still shining. The playground was full of life again, children laughing, parents talking, joggers passing by, but something was different. The air felt lighter. Sundar's chest no longer felt so heavy. And in Arjun's hand, the little paper crane still fluttered faintly, glowing just for a moment before fading into the breeze. Sundar looked around, almost expecting to see Elon. But there was no sign of him. Instead, on the bench beside him lay a folded note. He opened it slowly. You made your choice. Now live it well. And when the time comes, the door will open again. Sundar smiled faintly, tears still clinging to his lashes. He folded the note and slipped it into his pocket. Arjun leaned his head against his father's shoulder. Dad, he said softly. What was behind the door? Sundar wrapped an arm around his son and let out a long breath. Behind the door, he said quietly, was everything I'd been too afraid to see, and everything I didn't know I already had. As they sat there in the golden light of the setting sun, the world went on around them, full of noise, full of life, and for the first time in a long time, Sundar felt at peace, because the door had not only shown him what lay beyond. It had shown him how to come back. Asterisk.